All right. Well, man, it's so good to be back. I'm excited to be here. Family and I enjoyed the vacation. Thanks for letting us take some time to go do that and kind of recharge the batteries along the way. We did learn some things. We kind of went up into Canada for a little bit to see it. The kids hadn't seen it before. Learned a few things along the way. One, the economy in the U.S. is doing great because every highway between there and here was under construction, man. I mean, the whole thing along the entire way. It was great. We learned that the Canadians, for whatever reason, like to bastardize French fries by putting brown gravy and cheese curds on them. Yeah, clearly got some Canadians in the house, don't we? And the family and I, as always, enjoyed many a game as we were in close quarters in a vehicle together of, hey, who just farted? And, yeah. To which someone's out there going, did he just say farted in church? Yes, I did. Welcome to Radiant. We keep it real around here. So, like I said, I missed y'all. I'm so glad to be back. So glad to get jumping into this series about the Ten Commandments as well, too. Right before I went on vacation, though, 2 weeks in a row, I had the opportunity to marry two young couples. And just kind of a race there to the end. But I love marrying young couples because you can just see it in their eyes. The whole world is in front of them. They're just starting out. You know, as you think back to that time, you had no idea what you were getting into, did you, as you were going forward on that? But you just see that expectation and that joy. And so it's a lot of fun. Now, if you've been to a wedding ceremony or you've been in a wedding ceremony or you're looking forward to being into one someday, you know that wedding ceremonies have vows in them. I've not been to a wedding ceremony where there isn't vows. Maybe there is one, but most of them have vows. Now, no two of them are ever the same. I get it. Vows in one might be different from vows in the other, but I have noticed that there are some common themes between those vows from one ceremony to the next, that when they take those vows, there are many ideas that are portrayed that are similar from one wedding to the next. I wanted to show you a little bit of the vows that I often use in a wedding to kind of just build our case a little bit of where we're trying to go in our understanding of the Ten Commandments today and help us understand what's going on in this story. And so when I give vows at a wedding, they'll look something like this. I will say, nope, one more back, please, if you could. Oh, no, you're right. Do you take blank whose hand you hold? I was wrong on that. Do you take blank whose hand you hold to be your lawful wedded wife? Do you promise in the presence of this company and in reverence before God to love, honor, protect her through good times and bad, and to be faithful to her alone as long as you both shall live? Sound pretty similar to what you've heard maybe in other ceremonies as well? Typically, the groom answers, I do here, or things get really awkward at the wedding. And if he does at that point or isn't running, we continue on to the next part of the vows in which we'll say something like this. I blank take you blank. So like, I, Jason, take you, Christy, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. For better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness as in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part. According to God's holy ordinance, I pledge to you my love. Look pretty familiar? That's what we do in those ceremonies. So you can see there's some common themes in here. Now, before we take the vows, there's a time where I'll often spend teaching with them, kind of just some wisdom and some things you've learned about marriage. I've been married 21 years. There's a few things I've picked up along the way in that journey. And sometimes as you get to know this couple ahead of time, there's some things you specifically want to speak into. But there's some common themes that we often cover during that time as well, too. Some of those themes include communication and how important communication is in the marriage. I will tell them that communication, in fact, is the secret sauce in your marriage. That you've got to learn to communicate with greatness. That you have to speak to each other in a way that is loving, that is kind, that builds them up, that doesn't tear them down. That communication is often more about listening than it is talking sometimes, isn't it? But the point of communication in the marriage is for them to understand that they are to build each other up. When they communicate, they are to be words of affirmation. They are to be words of love. They are to be words of kindness. The second thing that I will tell many couples along the way is that money isn't everything. There will be times in your marriage where things will be tight, and there will be times when you're doing just fine. But I've watched too many marriages go down and bite the dust over this one, money. What does it mean to be content with what God gives us? How do we not get caught in the trap of trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? Any Joneses in the house? Sorry. We're not trying to keep up with you. What's it mean, though, to not get caught in that trap? You know what I mean? Like comparing yourself to everybody around you and feeling like it's some kind of race that you have to win. That's not healthy for a marriage, and I encourage couples, don't get caught in that trap. The last thing that I'll often remind them is to enjoy every single moment. There is no promise for tomorrow. Y'all know that, right? Marriage is not an end, it's a new beginning. Take time to go on dates. Continue to spend time privately with each other. Continue to do the things married couples do. If you don't know what those things are, ask a board member after the service. Spend time, though, with each other. Enjoy that time with each other. These are pretty common themes that make their way in every wedding that I've done, and I've done 30 plus in my life. Ladies, I want to talk to you for just a moment, if I could, just the ladies. Men, that is not permission to go to sleep. Stay awake, all right? But ladies, I want to talk to you. And ladies, I want to tell you, I was raised in the Bible Belt. I was raised in the South. And in the South, churches talk to the pastor, okay? I understand we live up in the Dutch North and we're a little bit reserved here, but I need your input on this, even if you're just going to nod your head to me as I go through some of these questions here in a minute. But feel free to say yes and yell out as well, too. But I want to ask you a series of questions about your understanding of marriage. That what you understood you were getting into when you went to marriage and what that ideal marriage looks like. And so some of those questions are going to look like this. Ladies, when you either are going to be married someday or are in a marriage, is there some expectation that you are going to be the only wife your husband has? All right. If that is not your expectation, there are some compounds in Idaho that you might be interested in. All right. I get it. But I think there's an expectation. You're going to be I'm going to be your only wife, right? Now let's get a little bit harder here. This one's going to step on some toes, but we got to do it. All right? Is there an expectation that your husband's not going to be looking at other women? Yeah. That he's not women in your presence, not women lustfully in a movie, or in particular, not maybe a woman on the internet screen. Would that be true? Yeah, I know I'm stepping on toes. Hang tight with me just a moment. Is there an understanding that your husband is going to speak of you fondly? That when he speaks of you, it's going to be in a way that builds you up, not tear you down? That it's going to be in a loving, kind, and gentle manner? Is that your understanding when you get married or are going to be married? Is there an understanding in that marriage that the two of you and your husband is going to set some time aside for both of you throughout the week, whether that's date time or just talking time, or if that's just time to get away or do those things that I'm not going to mention? You're allowed, you're married, okay? I just wanted to set the stage on that, all right? Is there an understanding, though, you're going to set some time aside just for each other, right? Yeah. Do you prefer a husband who respects authority and understands that authority doesn't begin by lording over, that leadership always begins by serving others, not being served? Do you agree to that? Okay. Do you want a husband who's not going to be a violent person, who's going to respect life, who's not going to lie, who's not going to steal? Do you want a husband who's not going to sleep with other women? Is that a big one? And do you want a husband who's not going to get caught up in that rat race of trying to compare themselves and keep up with others? A husband who is content with what God gives them and will use it in stewardship. Any of that sound good for you? Now, right about now, many of you who have been Christians maybe for some time have figured out what I'm doing. You see, it's real easy for us to see the Ten Commandments as a set of rules that we have to follow so that we don't piss God off, if we're being honest, right? But I want us to look at them a little bit differently today. I want us to see them as they would have seen them in the story where God gave them the 10 Commandments. But I want to keep building my case for just a second, if I could. When a couple comes to me and they say, hey, I want to get married, I often ask them a question that catches them a little bit off guard. The question I'll ask them is this: why'd you come to me? And you'll get answers like, well, you're my pastor, and that's fine, I get that. But really, truly, my point being this: at any time, you could march down to the justice of the peace and take care of this thing a lot faster than you will with me. Why did you come to me? And I don't always know the answer to that, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about what we're going to talk about a little bit today. See, the reason you go down to the justice of the peace with the state is that you are making a contract with the state. A contract is a set of expectations. It sets boundaries. It sets terms. You make that with the state. But when you come to a pastor at a church, while you are still making a contract with the state, more importantly, you are making a covenant with God. And there are a difference, and is a difference between those two things that is very important for you to understand if you're married or expect and want and desire to be married someday. Because you see, a contract is all about a set of obligations. You honor a contract because you are obligated to honor a contract. But a covenant is a promise made in love. And there lies the big difference between the two. You don't get married in a Christian ceremony to your spouse to set up a series of obligations that you have with them. You make a promise in love that for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part, I am going to love you. And I am going to act lovingly with you. If you are in a marriage based upon obligation, you are on a rocky road. A marriage is meant to be a covenant relationship between two people. And if we're going to understand what's going on with these 10 Commandments and what's happening in the story, we need to understand that what is going on here is a covenant ceremony, a marriage between God and a group of people. And the group of people in this story would have completely, absolutely understood what was going on, but we don't catch it because marriage today doesn't look anything like what marriage looked like in ancient times. You see, this idea that you would decide, hey, we want to be married. Well, first and foremost, the idea that you would decide to be married was part of the problem. The families did that. But the fact that you were going to get married and you go to the pastor or a priest, completely foreign in ancient times, even in Jesus' time and for hundreds of years beyond. The fact that a pastor or a priest would marry you was something that was started in the Middle Ages. You will not find a single story of a pastor or a priest marrying somebody in the Bible. Interesting, huh? It doesn't exist. Marriage in ancient times was something that happened in several stages. And sometimes that would take weeks, months, and oftentimes years, actually. The entire marriage process. And so if we're going to understand this story, we need to understand a few things about this marriage process and what it looked like. And then maybe the 10 Commandments will come alive and we can see them in a way we've never seen them before. Understand them in a way where that light bulb goes off and we go, oh, it's not a set of obligations. This are promises made in love of what this relationship is going to look like. Now, the first stage in an ancient marriage is two families come together and decide their kids are going to get married. This isn't about right and wrong. Marriage has changed a lot. Our ideas have changed a lot. And this isn't a discussion about that. This is just to understand what it was during this time. Two families would come together and they would show intent that their kids are going to be married. And this could happen at a very young age. Two children can be promised off to each other to happen many years later. During that time, they come to an agreement about what the husband's responsibility is to show his intent on marrying the daughter. Now, I went to Zambia a few years back, and they still do this. Many of you know this word as a dowry. They set the terms of a dowry. And a dowry is compensating the family for the loss of their daughter. And you say, what in the world? Well, you remember the daughters did a lot of the work around the house and they made things happen. And so when you went and took that daughter out, you were taking work away from that family. And so they compensated the parents for that. That was the purpose of the dowry. And you also have to remember that marriage was not usually about two couples that fell in love, started dating each other, and intended to be married. More often than not, weddings were either business or financial arrangements between two families, and oftentimes even political alignments between families. Marriage was a business, not so much a, hey, I love you sort of thing. You hoped over time these two would love each other and get along, but it was not a requirement for marriage back then. So the terms of the dowry would be set in a period of time for however long would go, and the groom would begin to accumulate the dowry. And the dowry can be in terms of things or money, and even promises to do something. At some point, though, then the groom would come to the father and say, here, I've done it. But for us to understand, was there a time when God set the terms of the dowry and said to the Israelites, here's what I'm going to do to show you my intentionality that we are going to be in covenant relationship with each other? And I say, he most certainly did. And if you have your Bibles and you want to turn to Exodus chapter 6, we're going to take a look at that real quick, because Jesus said it, or not Jesus, God said it to the Israelites with a series of what we call I will statements about what the terms were going to be for his responsibility in this relationship, to show his intentionality to be in covenant relationship with them. And so we catch that story in Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 6. It says this, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. Remember, at this time, the Egyptians are slaves in Egypt when God is speaking to them. He says, I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. So now you see there's a list of agreements here of what the responsibility of God is going to be in this covenant relationship. He says, I'm going to bring you out. I'm going to rescue you. I'm going to redeem you, which means set you free out of slavery. I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. He's already establishing the relationship here. And by the time we get to Exodus chapter 19 and chapter 20, where the Ten Commandments are brought, that's exactly what happened. Through God's mighty hand and through judgment on Egypt, through the blood of a Passover lamb, they were set free from slavery and released. They went through the waters and came out on the other side, and they are on their way to the land promised to them, the promised land. God has accomplished exactly what he said he was going to do. And what we would see in ancient marriage ceremonies then is once the groom has brought the dowry and got what he needs, he comes then to the father of the bride and he says, hey, I fulfilled my end of the bargain. It's time to move forward. Well, we catch that conversation, believe it or not, in Exodus chapter 19. If you want to turn your Bibles there, it's Exodus 19. It'll be on the screen as well. We see that conversation begin in 19 verse 4. God says, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, there he uses the word, then out of all the nations, you will be my treasured possession. I highlighted treasured possession on there because there's another word that in ancient times they would have understood exactly what was being said here, but we don't use that set of words today. Treasured possession was marriage language. They would have understood the minute God used the word treasured possession, he was speaking of a marriage ceremony. The light bulb would have gone off at their head. We don't use that term today because for whatever reason, women don't think they're property anymore of men. I don't know. That was a joke. You can laugh, all right? I don't really think that. But things have changed. And because they've changed, we don't necessarily pick up on all the nuances of the story, you see? But he's speaking to them as, you will be my treasured possession. In other words, my wife. That's the language he's speaking to on them. It is then the father's responsibility as the groom comes back and says, I fulfilled my obligations. I am being intentional and formally announcing I would like to marry your daughter. The father then goes back to the daughter and lets her know. We catch that language in Exodus 19, verse 7. It says, so Moses, who represents the father in this story, Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. And so Moses brought the answer back to the Lord. Short language from that is, I do. They said, I do. I intend to marry you. I intend to follow my obligations and do what I'm supposed to be doing. And the response back was, I do. Now here's what's interesting. At this point, they're married. In ancient times, even though they have not consummated the marriage yet, at this point, they are officially legally married. The term for that in ancient times was betrothed. This was the problem with Mary, Jesus' mother, and her husband Joseph. Those of you who know the story, Mary got pregnant while she was betrothed to Joseph. And it said that Joseph thought privately to divorce Mary. You can't divorce somebody you're not married to. That's the difference between marriage today and then. At that point, they were legally married, although they may not be living with each other yet, they may not have consummated the marriage yet. In ancient times, they're in at that point. It is at this point that the bride or the bride's father and the groom set a date for the groom to come and get the daughter. We see that in Exodus 19, but what we need to understand is when the groom comes, man, it's a party. There's usually a lot of noise, there's a lot of singing, there's a lot of dancing, there's instruments playing. You hear them from far off coming. There's this expectation. The groom is coming, the groom is coming, the groom is coming. It's an exciting time and everybody's looking forward to it because it's going to be a great party and a great thing. But before that, there has to be a time of preparation. We see that preparation time in Exodus 19, verse 14. It says, after that, Moses, he went down from the mountain to the people, and he consecrated them, which means set them apart and prepared them. And they washed their clothes, and then he said to the people, prepare yourselves for the third day. Then he says, abstain from sexual relations. And so Moses goes back and says, get prepared. The groom is coming. The groom is coming in 3 days. The groom is coming. Wash your clothes. Get prepared. But I always thought it was kind of unusual that last line. You're like, and abstain from sexual relations? I mean, what in the world's going on? But as you more and more begin to understand the context of what's going on here is the context of a marriage, a wedding ceremony going on, you begin to understand why that little line is put in there when it's not usually put in there for other covenant ceremonies. In other words, don't sleep around. The groom's coming. The groom is coming. Prepare yourselves. Get ready. And again, as the groom comes, it's laughter, it's joy, it's musical instruments, it's singing, it's dancing. It's loud. And in Exodus 6:16, we see, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, and everyone in the camp trembled. And then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. And it's from here that the covenant relationship begins to be defined. Not terms, not obligations, but a set of promises to love each other. If I love you, I will not do this to you or to others. And if you love me, it's the same. What we need to realize from this ceremony that's true throughout the pages of the Bible and is so true for you today if you've never made a decision to either believe in God or follow Jesus Christ. The most important thing to understand throughout this whole thing is God is inviting them into a relationship. This God wants to be in an intimate, close, covenant relationship with every single one of you. And that's the point of this ceremony. That's why God is showing them this picture through marriage. That's why, by the way, the love that Christ has for the church is told to us in the New Testament to be the same love that a husband and a wife are to have in marriage. It's the picture set for us from this very event. It's the establishment of God's covenant. And we have to remember, it's not based on obligations. It's about promises made in love. Here's the most important thing, your biggest takeaway today. I didn't leave you notes this week, so if you want to write this one, this is a big one. This is what I want you to understand. The 10 Commandments are vows that you're not going to cheat on your spouse. That's what they are. At their core, they are vows. You're not going to cheat on your spouse. And yet the history of Israel and the history of all mankind, the history of each of us in this room, whether we like to admit it or not, because I've heard people say, I've never cheated on anyone in my life. Oh, yeah? The history throughout the Old Testament and even in the New Testament is that God's constantly looking down at Israel and saying, you've been unfaithful to me. You've cheated on me. I'll show you a few. Malachi chapter 2, verse 11. He says, Judah has been unfaithful. Jeremiah 3:20, but like a woman unfaithful to her husband, so you, Israel, have been unfaithful to me, declares the Lord. Joshua 7:1, the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Any husband would get angry if their spouse was cheating on them. The language of unfaithfulness is marriage language. And it goes all the way back to this ceremony at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God is saying, I am coming to you. I have fulfilled my promises to get you out of Egypt and redeem you and set you free. But I am coming to you because I want to be in relationship with you. I want a covenant relationship with you based on promises of love for God and each other. That's what I'm up to here. But constantly there's stories of how we've been unfaithful to him. The entire book of Hosea was written, and God instructed the prophet to go marry a prostitute and have children with her. Why? Because it was a picture of how Israel was acting in the eyes of God. They were prostituting themselves with other gods and other ways and other things. There were things between them and God when there was never supposed to be anything between them and God. The husband doesn't want to share the wife. That's the imagery that's being shown to us here. We're being called into a covenant relationship with God. A covenant not set on obligations, but a covenant based upon genuine love for each other. If you love me, you won't use my name in a way that's disgraceful. If you love me, I will be your only God. If you love me, you will set a time aside for me. Or set aside time for me. If you love me, you won't cheat on me. You won't lie to me. You won't steal. You won't disgrace the family. If you love me, you will keep your promises. When you make a decision to follow Jesus Christ, you enter into a covenant relationship. And so if you ask me today, are the 10 Commandments still valid? Do they still exist today? You absolutely believe they are. They were the foundational principles of what this relationship between us and God is supposed to look like, and that has not changed. And I get it. There's people who are like, aren't we free from the law? Yes, you are free from all the temple rules and the temple's laws, but these weren't laws in that sense. These were promises in a wedding ceremony where God is the groom. When you go into a relationship with him, it's a covenant relationship based on promises. And so that's why you constantly see Jesus in his stories. That's why you constantly see throughout the Bible this idea where they're saying, remember your wedding vows. Remember the promises you took. Come back to me. I will be your God. You will be my treasured possession. Come back to me. Repent. Come back to the relationship. I miss you. I miss you. God's cry out to all of you is come back and honor your promises made in love. Because this much I know, Christians are promise keepers. We are meant to be promise keepers. Which gets us quickly to our so what moment. In the third commandment, God tells the Israelites this. Exodus 27, he says, do not misuse the name of the Lord, your God. I want to be the only person in your life. I don't want you looking at other gods and other things. I don't want anything coming between us. I don't want you to try to fill a God-sized hole with anything other than me, is what God is saying. And like in any healthy relationship, when you speak of me lovingly, with adoration, with praise. Speak of me in a way that builds me up with others, not tears me down. Every healthy marriage should do that. And if you don't do that, I hope you're feeling a little convicted right now. That's good for you. We should all be speaking of our spouses publicly and privately in a way that builds them up, not tears them down. Love your bride. Love the groom. Which means I'm going to have to push at something that's somewhat rather prevalent in our culture and society today, and maybe step on some toes again. We see this one all the time. It's this. How many of you seen OMG? OMG. Can you throw that slide up on the screen for me, please? Oh my God. Woman won some concert tickets on the radio station the other day. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I lost count. I had no idea how many oh my Gods came out. And no judgment here. I'm not your judge. I'm not. Not your dark overlord. I am coach. I want to ask you a question. If you use this, whether it's in a text or verbally or what, are you speaking of God in such a way that you are building him up, or are you misrepresenting him to the world? Your groom, this covenant relationship that you're in, are you speaking in such a way that builds God up? Are you honoring your wedding vows, which say, I love you so much, I will never speak of your name in a way that belittles you or condescends you or tears you down? Remember, man, these aren't a list of obligations. These aren't a set of rules. God's going to hate you if you do it, get mad at you. Can't see him that way. Because it completely changes it when you look at him and you realize, no, these aren't obligations. These are promises made in love that show the dignity and the respect and the honor that should be prevalent in every single marriage out there. And God is calling you through this 10 Commandments to not only understand what your covenant relationship with him is supposed to look like, but what it's supposed to look like with each other. We're called to love him and called to love others unconditionally. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself for another week. As we end, watch this video with me.